Attention dear viewers. Before we begin, I feel obligated to inform you that the video you are about to watch is an analysis on a song that is very, very dreadful. The following analysis contains references to death, tragedy, and an overuse of the word unfortunate. It is for this reason that I implore you to please click away from this video and instead go watch one of my better, happier videos instead. If of course for whatever reason you feel inclined to continue watching this video, that is entirely your choice. But be warned, the video you are about to watch is very, very unfortunate. When a series of unfortunate events came to Netflix last year, it brought fans of the book series much enjoyment. From the great characterization to its wonderful set pieces and atmospheres, the show captured the feel of the books perfectly. With the second season about to release, let's take a look back at one of the best parts of season 1, the song at the end. In less than 3 minutes, this song captures everything that makes a series of unfortunate events a great adaptation, as well as highlighting key character moments and foreshadowing for more to come. Unfortunately, the audio will be edited to avoid copyright. However, there will be a link in the description where you'll be able to experience everything this song has to offer on your own. Also, spoiler warning, not only for the first season, but also for the second and third season, since some of the information I will be providing delves into the later aspects of the books, which those seasons will eventually cover. Now then, with all that out of the way, let's take a deeper look and find out everything the song does right, as well as why it's an unfortunately perfect end to the first season of a series of unfortunate events. The first thing to examine would be the actual lyrics themselves of the song.
You may think that the Baudelaires ought to prevail and be tucked someplace all safe and sound. Count Olaf captured and rotting in jail, his hench people nowhere around.
The first verse is sung by Lemony Snicket. It's basically an introduction of the story and the song, which makes sense seeing as how Lemony Snicket serves as the narrator of the series.
But there's no happy endings, not here and not now. This tale is all sorrows and woes. You dream that justice and peace win the day, but that's not how the story goes.
Next up is the chorus. Interestingly enough, the chorus is sung solely by Count Olaf the first time. Keep that in mind for when we discuss Count Olaf as a character later on. The chorus for the most part simply serves to contrast the expectations of what will occur with what actually occurs, and reinforce the idea that everyone suffers throughout these unfortunate events.
You might think that two parents, both brave and both true, would live till a nice ripe old age. But I'm sad to say I have bad news for you. The curtain rings down on this stage.
The next verse is sung by Mr. Poe. This verse simply serves as a reminder and a secondary depiction of the Baudelaire children being informed of their parents' unfortunate death. This verse is sung by Mr. Poe, as he was the one to deliver the news to the children in the first place.
Yes, there's no happy endings, not here and not now.
This tale is all sorrows and woes.
You might dream that justice and peace win the day, but that's not how the story goes.
The chorus repeats, though this time it is first sung by Violet and Klaus, then Count Olaf, and finally Mr. Poe, with all of them singing the final line of the chorus together. There's not much to importance of the chorus this time around.
I once loved a girl and she thought well of me. We thought we'd be happy together. But now I'm alone, as you can well see, and she's cold in her grave forever.
The next verse is by Lemony Snicket, remembering and lamenting the death of his dear beloved Beatrice. Beatrice and her death are important, not only because she would later be revealed to be the mother of the Baudelaires, but also because her death is one of the main driving forces for Lemony Snicket as a narrator. He feels obligated and compelled to tell the unfortunate events surrounding the Baudelaires for his beloved Beatrice.
There's no happy endings, not here and not now.
This tale is all sorrows and woes. You might dream that justice and peace win the day, but that's not how the story goes.
The chorus repeats, but what is interesting about the chorus this time around is that at the end, Violet sings individually without Klaus. Remember this detail, as it is very important for analyzing Violet as a character later on.
The world is a pair of ill-fitting pants and other dire, hideous clothes.
You may think that 3 children would lead pleasant lives, but that's not how the story goes.
The following verse is an interesting one, as it is separated into two characters, rather than being focused on a single character as the previous verses were. The first part is sung by Count Olaf, and it may be a reference to future character Esme Squalor, seeing as how describing the world as, quote, a pair of ill-fitting pants and other dire hideous clothes fits in rather well with how she describes things by fashion, with it being in or out. This is admittedly a looser connection, but it still makes sense given the context. As for the Baudelaire's part in this verse, it is a short variation on the chorus, even going as far as using the line featured at the end of the chorus, "That's not how the story goes," to end their verse. Their verse very much parallels the chorus.
Some people smile at the end of the day.
Some people laugh, I suppose.
But to me, there's nothing but gloom and despair. That's just how the story goes. It's just how the story.
The song ends with an altered version of the chorus. The final chorus and the ending that follows it are perhaps the most important part of the song, but we'll go over it more in depth later. For now, let's move on to the characters themselves and how the song amplifies each character. The first character to discuss is Lemony Snicket, as he arguably has the least going for him. His location in the song is overlooking the grave of his beloved Beatrice. As previously mentioned, and as seen in the song, Beatrice is Snicket's main motivation throughout this. As for Snicket's role in the song, he serves the same role in the series, that of a narrator. There isn't much more to him than this. Something interesting to note though, is that Lemony Snicket is dressed in the same uniform as the Baudelaires. Now I know throughout the series he is seen wearing similar outfits to them, but what makes this specifically important is the fact that Snicket himself is an alumnus from Proof Rock Preparatory School. That is impossible to say. Before the song begins, there is even a picture of Snicket and Count Olaf together at the school. The books unfortunately never elaborated on the history between Lemony Snicket and Count Olaf, but perhaps this is a sign that the Netflix series will delve into this in later seasons. The next least important character in the song would have to be Mr. Poe. What separates Mr. Poe from the rest of the characters singing is that he is the only one unaffected by the unfortunate events of the series, and this is very evident throughout the song. Whereas everyone else in the song is depicted as solemn and despondent, Mr. Poe is in a very cheerful mood. His solo verse is presenting the death of the Baudelaires, which is arguably the only thing of importance Mr. Poe does in the entire series. Another interesting aspect is the fact that Mr. Poe is depicted as singing along to the radio, when singing in the song unaware of the true tragedy behind the lyrics. This could be seen sort of as a parallel to how Mr. Poe follows along with the unfortunate events of the Baudelaires as the caretaker of their fortune, but he is ultimately unaware of everything else that's truly going on behind the scenes. The song ending with Mr. Poe cheerfully humming and turning off the radio claiming that was a nice song is very indicative of how many characters in the series witness the Baudelaires' unfortunate tragedy, but most remain oblivious to the true extent of their suffering. Next, of course, there's the Baudelaires themselves. The first thing to notice is the fact that the Baudelaires do not have a solo verse like many of the other characters in the song. The closest they get is sharing a verse with Count Olaf, and even then, as previously stated, it seems to be a variation of the chorus rather than an original verse. The fact that they do not get a verse of their own represents how they are still children. They have no say and no control over what happens to them, or the situations that they are often put into. Violet is the only Baudelaire to sing on her own, since Klaus only ever sings along with Violet, and Sunny does not sing at all. Violet being the only one to get her own solo part represents her role as the lead caretaker for her siblings. Being the eldest, she feels it is her responsibility to look after them, and to keep them safe. As for Sunny, it's difficult to analyze her in the context of the song, seeing as how she doesn't sing. There are, however, still some aspects to point out. Throughout the song, Sunny does very small acts of comfort towards Violet, such as putting her hand on Violet's leg or resting on Violet's arm for comfort. It is admittedly difficult to know for sure which of these actions are scripted and which are just coincidence, since Sunny is still a baby and perhaps she was just doing this because it's something babies do. Personally though, I'm leaning much more towards this being scripted and of importance, rather than coincidence. The reason for this is the ending of the song. In the end, Sunny is shown whistling to the music. This shows not only is Sunny an observer in everything that's occurring, but she's also an active participant. As a baby, sure, she can't sing along with the other characters, but whistling is her method of showing she's engaged with what's occurring, both in the song and the story as a whole. There's often the question of whether or not Sunny truly understands everything that's going on, and I think her whistling at the end is indicative that she does understand what's going on, and does know the pain that the Baudelaires are in. Finally, let's take a look at Count Olaf, who is perhaps the best depicted character in the entire song. Whereas with most of the other characters, it is very clear how they feel during the song, Count Olaf requires a lot more assumptions to be made about him, and about his character. Throughout it, he looks very frustrated, but rather than seeming angry like he usually is, he seems more dejected, maybe even woeful. At first one would think he's lamenting the fact that the Baudelaires escaped from him once again, but I believe there's much more to this going on than simply being mad about losing the fortune. The first explanation for his mood throughout the song would be the recent death of Georgina Orwell. The series makes it very clear that there's a history between them, and even if he was willing to give her up for the Baudelaire fortune, her death would still have an impact on him. A stronger explanation, though, would be the fact that Count Olaf himself feels he's a victim of the story. Each character in the song, except of course Mr. Poe, has a specific loss driving them. For Lemony Snicket, it's the loss of Beatrice. For the Baudelaires, it's the loss of their parents. But for Count Olaf, it's really unclear what his loss is. Well, in the 12th book of the series, The Penultimate Peril, Count Olaf alludes to the fact that the Baudelaire parents are the reason he himself is an orphan. He states their mother Beatrice asked Kit Snicket for poisonous blow darts during a night out at the theaters, and that those poisonous blow darts are the very weapon that made him an orphan. He also made it very clear that the Baudelaire's parents were not completely innocent themselves or free of any wrongdoing. Remember that Count Olaf was the first character to sing the chorus. The chorus in the song emphasizes this story has no happy endings. There's no justice for anyone. For Count Olaf, his happy ending would be gaining the Baudelaire fortune that he feels he rightfully deserves. His justice would be gaining the fortune after the Baudelaire's parents took his away. Another aspect that supports this is the fact that Count Olaf and the Baudelaires share a verse. While at first this decision can be explained as being representative of how Count Olaf persistently chases the Baudelaires for their fortune, perhaps there is more going on here. Perhaps the reason they share a verse is because their connection goes further back to their parents. The Baudelaire's parents presumably killed Count Olaf's parents, and Count Olaf in turn presumably killed the Baudelaire's parents to gain the fortune he feels entitled to as, quote, justice for his parents' death. Count Olaf's happy ending is gaining the Baudelaire fortune, but nobody gets a happy ending in this story, as the chorus points out. If Count Olaf's role in the song is foreshadowing of his own troubled past, then this is just a brilliant decision. The final book in the series does attempt to make Count Olaf appear sympathetic by showing him at his weakest and touching on his troubled past. However, by this point, it was 13 books too late. Without going into any of the supplementary materials, such as the Beatrice letters, Count Olaf in the books just can't be redeemed or sympathetic at all. The Netflix series, however, could fix this issue. In the upcoming seasons, it could delve into his backstory more than the books did, and flesh out his character to appear more human. It already did a great job with expanding on Georgina Orwell, tying her into the Baudelaire's parents' past and VFD, as well as making her far better than she ever was in the books, so I have high hopes for Count Olaf. The picture of Count Olaf with Lemony Snicket in Prufrock Preparatory School, still hard to say, as well as Count Olaf's overall depiction and role in this song are the perfect starting point for delving into his past. Now the series just needs to follow up and deliver to make his character far better than he was in the books, and even then the book still presented a great villain. Finally now, let's take a look at how the song is set up, and why the ending of the song is perfection, as I said earlier. Perhaps the most important thing to examine when looking at the structure of the song would be the rhyme scheme. The rhyme scheme, most consistently seen throughout the verses, is AB-AB, better known as alternating rhyme scheme. The best example of alternating rhyme scheme that I can think of would be Shakespearean sonnets. Now technically Shakespearean sonnets don't use rhyme scheme themselves, but they use a variation of alternating rhyme scheme with a couplet at the end. Edgar Allan Poe also incorporated alternating rhyme scheme loosely into some of his poems, including Annabel Lee and the Raven. Neither of these are strictly alternating rhyme scheme themselves, but it is incorporated into the poems and it does help them flow. Finally, there's the poet Robert Frost, who uses alternating rhyme schemes a lot in his poems, and several of them can be seen as prime examples of alternating rhyme scheme. A common theme amongst many of the works mentioned here would be tragedy. Therefore, alternating rhyme scheme fits well with the melancholic tone of the song. The alternating rhyme scheme is prevalent throughout the song, except of course in the end where the rhyme scheme changes. This change in rhyme scheme is important, as it signifies a change in the song itself. As for the music of the song, I unfortunately do not have much to say, and my analysis of the music is admittedly weak. What I do have to say though is the instrumental sound to be mostly guitar, piano, and I think I heard some violin in there. The piano and the violin are both instruments that are commonly used to create a somber mood. The violin could also be a subtle reference to Vice Principal Nero, an upcoming character who has frequent violin concerts that the students are forced to attend. But again, this reference could just be a coincidence. The music itself is slow, soft, and it's very silent. You can barely even hear it sometimes. It works tremendously to create the mood that the song wants to convey, that of sadness, somber, and melancholy. Lastly though, let's discuss the ending of the song, as I did say it was the most important part of the song and perfection itself. The ending of the song conveys a message of change and acceptance. We see this with a few examples. Firstly, the lyrics in the song change from "that's not how the story goes" to "that's just how the story goes." It changes from denial to acceptance of the story. The rhyme scheme itself changes from what it previously was, and it loses its alternating rhyme scheme pattern. The message of accepting change is important because it sets up the future of the series. For the first few books, the Baudelaires merely follow the same formula. They get sent to a new guardian, they get found by Count Olaf, they have to outwit him before his scheme to gain their fortune succeeds, rinse and repeat. They never fully come to terms with their situation, because they're just being sent from guardian to guardian. In the later books, however, they have no guardian to rely on. The Baudelaires must themselves alone decide where to go, what to do, and how to survive. They must come to accept every unfortunate event that has happened, and the changes those events brought into their lives if they want to stay out of Count Olaf's grasp. There is, however, one minor problem with the ending being acceptance, and that is the fact that with acceptance comes closure. While the Baudelaires do eventually come to terms with their parents' death, they never truly receive any sense of closure on the incident. By the end of the 13th book, they also have very little to absolutely no closure on VFD or anything that they've been put through. This is why the song gets cut off by Mr. Poe coughing at the end. Mr. Poe cuts the song off because the song does not get a chance to properly end. If Mr. Poe's coughing didn't cut off the song, and it had finished, that would have given the Baudelaires a sense of closure. But the song never finishes. The Baudelaires never get any closure, and that's unfortunately just how the story goes. Never getting their true ending, never getting their closure. Mr. Poe's cough cuts off the song, and their lives continue into misfortune. What do you think of this song, and what do you think of the Netflix adaptation of a series of unfortunate events as a whole? I'm sure there's a lot more that I might have missed, or perhaps you have a different interpretation than I did. The great thing about interpretation is there's never a right or a wrong answer, so I'd love to hear your take on this. Any music experts out there, I would absolutely love to hear what kind of an analysis can be made about the music and the instrumentals, since that was an aspect I had a lot of difficulty looking into, and I really feel it was underdeveloped compared to the rest of this. With Season 2 coming out soon, I can't wait to see what material it gives me to work with. I hope you all enjoyed, and remember to always take a deeper look and to find the hidden truth under the surface.